faces again, and also some new faces. So particularly thrilled to have Ed Smith on today. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Yeah, Ed's a lovely chap, and you're gonna get the full pleasure of that in due course. Just to do a bit of an intro to Ed. Ed's general manager for integrated marketing for Europe for Amazon, no less. Who, is there a more high profile company at this point in time? Ed is hugely experienced, and just to give an insight into that, he's worked in media, digital, retail, banking, IT, tourism, FMCG. Started his career back in 1991, and he's been agency side. He set up his own company. He's got a few Ned roles, including being a Ned for Make-A-Wish in both Australia and then the UK. Worked in banking for 4 years, and news for 5 years. He moved to Amazon in 2017 into the role he's in. So he's packed it in. So we're going to get some brilliant insights from his journey. He's also another Marketing Academy fellow. And just in the last couple of weeks, spent a bit of time with Ed on a retreat, an alumni retreat, which was a treat to have that retreat. And I would say Ed is a true character. He speaks his mind, but in an incredibly empathetic way. And I think you're going to get a lovely insight into somebody who's a genuinely lovely human being. And so I am really, really thrilled to have you on the show, Ed. And I'm going to hand to Richie to get us started.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Ed, honestly, what a pleasure to have you on. Really, really cool. I mean, we talk about journeys, right? What Mark's omission was to that, I guess you talked about professional career, but what people don't know about Ed, or maybe they do, is that Ed actually traveled the length and breadth of the UK when he moved over from Oz in around 2016. And it was just a brilliant way and a true sort of, marketer's dream to be able to go around the country, interview loads of cool people, literally, off the street as it was, just to get a much richer insight about the land that he was then going to settle in. So it's just absolutely brilliant, and that shows the character of Ed. So Ed, I'm gonna kick off today and ask you, now that you've been probably in the UK, God, for about 7 years now, probably.
Yeah, in my sixth year now.
Sixth year. How are you finding it? How are you finding us?
I love it. And I think two of those years I was commuting to Luxembourg. That was a little harsh, a lot of early mornings and not eating properly. But yeah, London's growing on me now. And I have to say, I quite like working from home a bit. I picked tennis up again, and these long summer days, to be able to get up at 6 in the morning and go and play tennis before work is a very civilized way to live.
Sounds brilliant. Good. I'm glad we're treating you well.
Yeah.
So lots of silver linings to lockdown, but also tough. I mean, tough for everybody. What do you think you'll take out of this last 18 months in terms of your approach to work and life?
It's a good question. I think we kind of settled in and enjoyed the first couple of months. Okay, it was kind of novel, and we literally got dressed up in the evenings and had drinks on the terrace and cooked food from different countries and pretended we were traveling, and that all went well for about 8 weeks. And then kind of all of a sudden, I nearly lost my mind. I got such terrible cabin fever. And I think having grown up in Australia, in the country with kind of a big open sky, and had very busy jobs with a lot of travel and a lot of balls in the air, waking up, having breakfast, sitting at my desk, being on task for 14 hours, doing some exercise in the flat, cooking dinner in the flat, going to bed, it really made me realize that I actually can't sit still. I'm a moving person. I'm a kinetic learner. I learn by doing. If ever I'm at a conference or something, I always have to stand up and kind of pace around a bit at the back of the room. At university, I fell asleep if I was sitting in my chair. So I've learned that I need to be on the move. So that once we kind of clocked that, and I had that moment of distress where kind of everything nearly fell apart. We then started reading the COVID rules very, very carefully, and rallying our resources and kind of started to create a mobile life. We spent some time in Malta in summer. We spent some time in Dubai in winter, and our offices were open. And while the government advice was we should work from home if we can, I said to my team quite clearly, we're at 10% capacity. If for your mental health you need some exposure to your colleagues, then this is how you do it safely. So I kind of took advantage of that and was in there one day a fortnight or whatever the minimum exposure I could have without coming unplugged. I think I learned to spend some time not just doing, but being in the third person, watching how I was doing and watching how I was feeling and watching how I was treating others, and being very conscious to adjust my work style to keep me at my peak performance so that I could work well and support my team, rather than just get into a funk and become that sort of angry, grumpy person on the other end of the video call because I wasn't taking care of myself. So yeah, I'm a wriggler, I'm a fidgeter, I'm a mover, and I need to recognize that and support that with the way I set myself up.
But in addition to the wriggler and the mover, you're also a what you call a player. And there's a bit of a funny story that I'll tell for just a second. So I heard Ed talk in 2016 as he was on the cusp of coming to the UK, and then of course in the following year scoring an amazing job at Amazon. But prior to that, he spoke to a very kind of small, intimate cohort at the Marketing Academy, and his key takeaway, or one of the key takeaways, was that you shouldn't be a victim, you should be a player. So when circumstances go against you, it's actually how you react to them that actually determines the trajectory of your success or the way that you come out of it. And Ed, clearly, the story that you've just given about how you've understood your own mentality, your own thoughts, and then being able to do something about it just demonstrates that once again in spades. But more so, I'd love just for you to elaborate a little bit on that sort of that phrase and framing that you said to us all those years ago, because it really struck with me, and I'm sure it'll resonate with others too.
Yeah, I think so. That particular phrase comes from Fred Kaufman, and I heard that in an audiobook that a friend gave me. But basically, it has a pyramid with accountability at the top, and then blame, complain, and defend. Other leadership or management texts refer to it as being above the line or below the line. But I think what it recognizes is life will deal us pretty rank cards from time to time. And our default way to manage that usually is blame, complain, and defend. Whereas you have another option, which is to clock that's a dud card, and think of that simply in terms of what's my next move. So I just love that as a model, because you're always in control. And I'm not a golfer, but if I imagine golf, you can hit a beautiful tee off, it goes off into the sand, and you can blame the ball, the clubs, the weather, whinge to your friend or whatever, or you just clock, gee, that was a shit shot. What am I going to do next? And you get your sand iron out and off you go. And so, obviously I can't live like this every minute of every day, but more often than not, I try simply when something bad happens to clock, wow, that was shit. Okay, what do I do next? What's my next move? And it is very empowering. And the trip that you mentioned around the UK, in some ways was a response to this. I was in an interview with a headhunter, and her colleague came in and picked my CV up and looked at me and really dismissively said, ugh, it's a bit Crocodile Dundee, isn't it? Couldn't you dial up your UK experience a bit? And I thought, well, I can't really. I've never even worked in the UK. But I was instantly in the blame, complain, defend, and I spent probably half an hour of how dare she, that's so rude. And then I thought, wow, what a gift. She's told me something that others have probably thought. What can I do about this? And I'm taking a year off. Fuck it. I'll go to 100 towns and cities. I'll interview 5 people in each place, and I'll come back to London with more knowledge about the sentiment of the consumer in the UK than any marketer that's ever worked in London in their office and gone to Cambridge and Oxford and London Business School and lived in their ivory tower. I'm going to use everything I know to learn more than anybody. And that's probably the bias to action and the deliver results that helped get me into Amazon, apart from being an amazing, humbling, and interesting journey. And so that was literally me thinking, well, don't be angry that she said that, be grateful for that. And what do I do next? A whole bunch of options. I could have ignored it or whatever. And so just as a little life thing, be a player, not a victim, frame adversity always in terms of what am I going to do next? It served me really, really well.
I love it. Thanks, Ed.
What a brilliant insight. And I had no idea. When Richie described it, it was just a trip around the UK. It sounded like a jolly, whereas actually you packed it in. It was incredibly rich for that. I mean, what's already coming through it is you've got a very sunny disposition, and you're also quite reflective. You mentioned something a couple of weeks ago about how you think the way that you grew up, the context you grew up in, has had an impact upon your outlook on life. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like growing up on a farm and what that meant?
No one would have called me Sonny when I was young. I was a sulky little teenager. I think so. My dad was a politician and a farmer, and so he worked very, very hard. And I was probably largely raised by my mum because he was often in the city. But we were very free and empowered as kids to drive any vehicle that was there, use any tools. This will surprise a few people. Shoot any of the firearms, light fires, do all these. I can't, but Mum had 5 boys. The fact we have all our fingers, toes, and limbs is kind of amazing. So we were very, very empowered to play with, work with, use anything we wanted on the property. But the only time you could really get in terrible trouble in my family was if you broke something and didn't tell or kind of tried to cover it up. And Dad always said, you can use or play with anything you want, but put it back better than you found it. And so if you took one of the vehicles, you fueled it before you put it back, or you washed it before you put it back. And he didn't mean it this way, but it had such an impression on me that I talk to the people that I work with and I say, you have a contract with the company, we pay you and you bring your skills and experience, but your contract with me as your leader is I will give you back better than I find you. And so I have, that's where I get my pleasure, and that's the contract beyond the money and the job. And I think probably it came from that really powerful education of putting things back better than I found it. And I've misinterpreted or evolved it to giving people back better than I found them. Mm. But of all the things I've done in my career, I never reflect on, wow, 2002, that was amazing. We beat our KPIs by 14%. I can't remember any of that, even though sometimes we did. But I can remember the people that I helped unblock or develop or have gone on to really big careers and become MDs or CEOs. And that I really remember, and that's visceral. And that's been a great source of joy and pleasure and is ongoing. So for me personally, that's kind of what I always look for at work is how do we do the job as well as we can? But my job as a leader is to give the people back better than I found them. And I think I learned that from Dad and the freedom we had on the farm. I don't know where that's I got lovely. It from. Maybe there.
Okay. No, let me try.
That's lovely.
Absolutely. And let me try and transcend a little bit from experiences in Oz to experiences in the UK. But I want to get your thoughts on maybe some of the working differences or cultural differences that you've noticed between the two lands, and perhaps some of the highs and lows that come with that.
Matthew Platts at Dentsu, who I'm very fond of, he introduced me to someone once and said, meet Ed Smith. He's incredibly charming and unbelievably blunt. And so I don't know if any of you have watched that that BBC sitcom W1, where the guy, I can't remember the actor's name, who was the Lord in Downton Abbey. There's an intern in the office, and after his week, everyone was too embarrassed to tell him that his week's over and he's not meant to come in anymore. And a year and a half later, he's still there interning. And to me, that's just a lovely piece of British humor of perhaps not wanting to have the awkward conversation. And so in my teams, I always build a feedback culture. We're very deliberate about our purpose, and that's not our job description. That's why this group at this point in time, over and above our job description, the behaviors as a team that we want to exhibit to achieve our purpose, and then giving fast and frequent feedback. That's pretty hard to establish in a British team, because culturally, it's much more difficult, I think, for British people to tell their peers, hey, you didn't listen well in that meeting, or I think you need to a bit more this or a bit less that. And so to get a team to a position where it's safe and comfortable to give each other helpful feedback is very, very difficult. And I imagine probably that inputs into things like sporting team difficulties. So I look at a leader like Gareth Southgate, and I think to achieve that level of success, he must have broken that down and built a feedback culture in that team where other coaches have failed to. Because if we're all too polite to give each other little tips along the way and catch each other doing things right and doing things wrong, it's very difficult to become, or maybe even impossible to become, the highest performing team you can. I've even had in the marketing academy scholars challenge me that a feedback culture is inappropriate in the British culture and that won't fit, and therefore you can't or shouldn't even try and achieve that. But I think it's necessary to be the highest performing team you can, but it's gentle and difficult to get to that, I think. Australia culture is much more direct, and uncomfortably so, I think, when British people come over to work in Australia initially.
Yeah.
I think that directness is critical. We've had a few sports people who've come on the show and who've gone on to success in business, and they say that probably the biggest thing that they pull through is the desperate hunger for feedback. Otherwise, how do they improve? But as you say, creating the sort of psychological safety can be a challenge in British culture. But let's
double click on that for 2 secs, because if you're at the gym and you're doing arm curls and your trainer says, "Hey, keep your elbow beside your side," are you offended? No. If you're playing tennis and your coach says, "Hey, throw your ball a little higher to serve," are you offended? No. So if you come out of a meeting and your boss says, "Hey, you'll get more out of Sally if you just listen a little bit more carefully," you shouldn't be offended. Like, they're not saying you're a bad person or you're incompetent. They're just giving you a tip about a behavior that's going to get a better outcome. It's no different than the elbow at the gym or the throw in the tennis. So I think if you're lucky enough to be given a tip like that, don't bristle, don't react badly. It's not a judgment of you. It's a tip on a behavior to help you achieve a better outcome at what you're currently doing at that moment, no differently than tennis or gym. That's just a little thing to get comfy with.
No, that's a fantastic insight. And of course, you would only give the tip about listening to Sally because you cared about the performance of the individual that you're giving the advice to. Now, that's a wonderful.
And you put yourself at great personal risk to care enough to give that tip. Like that, you will feel sick in your stomach before you say that to that person. And so it's a very generous thing that you've just done. And usually it's misinterpreted as an attack.
Yeah, exactly. So let's rewind the clock a bit, and the question we always ask for people who've come on the show who are working in marketing, which is how did you get into marketing?
So I was an irrigation contractor. That I had a little business I'd set up, and I had 10 people, and we did sprinkler systems in these huge estate gardens in the area where I grew up. And people were making a lot of money from wool, and then the floor price collapsed and all my work dried up, and I went and hung out with my Austrian friends and was a ski instructor, even though I couldn't ski very well, up at Mt.Buller. And from there I got some sponsorships for the race department, worked in marketing. I worked in school group sales in summer. We had a very bad year and the marketing manager was made redundant, and I was acting marketing manager. And then I turned into the marketing director. So it was one of those, if you don't have a passion, follow your curiosity, and it's just one thing led to another. So yeah, it was a lucky break. So I ended up marketing director of a ski resort because I did a winter being a ski bum.
Well, it's time and time again. Sorry, Richie. Time and time again, many people have said it was almost a happy accident. And of course, the School of Marketing is to help people to manage and curate and through those happy accidents. Back to you, Richie.
Well, Ed, you just dropped a bomb in there, and I don't think you realized, right? If you don't have a passion, have curiosity. I mean, flip a heck, right? That is just such a cool way of thinking about it, and really, it's quite helpful.
Yeah, that's been my whole career, to be honest. I mean, I did have a little bit of a passion for skiing, but there's two things I always think about is when you're making career decisions, always be drawn to something that's attractive as opposed to be jumping away from something that's a burning platform. Now, look, in an emergency, in an abusive workplace, you may have to do that once in your career, but I see often people jump away, and they're not jumping toward. And I think if you can be jumping towards something that draws your curiosity, or if you're lucky enough a passion, just going to be so much more fun to live your life than falling into whatever because you're jumping away from something. It kind of probably links with that victim player thing. It's move toward what you want rather than away from what you don't want. If you can, I think that'll bring more joy.
I love that.
And so into the here and now. I mean, obviously, the last 18 months, the world's turned upside down. But what are the big things that you think are happening in the world that are going to affect marketing into the future?
Wow, it's big. So I think one of the things I noticed when I moved to Europe is because the companies are largely bigger, marketing tends to usually here mean marketing communications rather than marketing.
Yeah.
So in smaller companies, the marketing director will be very much involved in product distribution. Often they'll be sales and marketing, so they'll be running the sales team. Pricing, obviously the commercial and the CFO team has a lot to do with it, but you're very at the table. And Marcoms is a part of your role, but you're really marketing the 4 Ps. What I noticed when I was looking for marketing leadership roles in the UK and Europe is actually they're usually marketing communication roles, and they're not even usually executive board roles. And so I think as we enter an era where business is hyper competitive and they've squeezed out all the efficiency you can, the need for growth comes from innovation and meeting customer needs better. And I think then we need to be thinking about product, user experience, pricing, and communication working much, much closer together. So I would profess to think that the marketing leader of the future will probably sit over a broader function that really is influencing all of the 4 Ps, of which Marcoms and lower funnel digital variable marketing will be part of that channel. So I think whether it's a school of marketing or it's the marketing academy or other programs, kitting marketers up to sit at the executive board and be leaders that can influence across the whole spectrum. So at Amazon, we talk about business, technology, and operations. That's critical to marketing. And Marcoms, the creative, the left brain side, that's lovely and a part of it. But a good marketer in Amazon must be very fluent in business, technology, and operations. And the creative bit comes to that, but it's not a Marcoms role. And so I think if you're really drawn to Marcoms, frame your career in terms of Marcoms, maybe be a bit more drawn to the agency world. But marketing as a business discipline, it's numeric, it's strategic, it involves distribution, pricing, customer experience. That's probably where I would be advising marketers to kit up and drive towards.
Ed, in a wonderful world of our Britishness and not trying to offend, we tend to always come up against these conflicts, and I love the thought about being a holistic marketer where you actually have control over the entire spectrum. And in fact, I think in many ways,
influence. You might not get control. You certainly should be very involved.
And I appreciate that. I guess the broader question that a lot of marketers ask me is, how do we do that in a way which does not come across as trying to step on everybody else's toes? Because in British business today, as you mentioned, marketing gets siloed to the coloring in department, which is clearly not the case. But yet people want to then start to infiltrate and actually have more influence into other areas. So what advice would you give to people trying to be more holistic, but the organization structures are not helping them do that?
So this is a very important question because pretty well every organization is the same. We're structured in the silos that our org design creates, excuse me, and marketing is one of those silos. So if I go back to my earlier point about what is the purpose of the team that I led at Foxtel, which is Sky in Australia, we had a purpose that we are the kitchen of the business house, and we're the only place in the business where all of the family comes together. And just think about that for a minute. You've got broadcast, you've got operations, you've got content, you've got technology, you've got sales, you've got marketing, all in their silos. None of the other divisions or silos create any form of interaction, but marketing is the only place we can do that. So we designed our floor to facilitate that. We had the biggest open area space. So everyone's anniversaries, arrivals, leaving drinks, people would book the marketing floor. We built the biggest meeting room in the company. That could be a classroom for 50 people or an offsite room. So all of the on-site, off-sites were all booked on the marketing floor. And all of our projects, whether we're working on improving the digital experience, user experience, pricing and packaging, whatever we're working on, we would be drawing in engineering, technology, commercial, sales, and we would be facilitating. Comes from the French word facile, to make easy. We're not owning, we're not leading, we're facilitating. We're bringing in all the pieces of the business to collaborate to solve a problem. So we were the kitchen of the company. Then we had a seat at the table. And that was our purpose. If we didn't do that, they would all just solve their problems by themselves. And, you know, we bring something to the table. We have research, insights, we understand from structural equation model the perceptions that we need to shift to unlock growth for our business. So we've got stuff we can bring in. And then once we've cooked up whatever we cook up in the kitchen of product, user experience, pricing improvement, obviously we go out and hawk that through Marcoms and our conversion engine. So I think I would take it as granted that businesses are in silos and blame, complain, defend. Or if I'm a player, what am I going to do about it? Can I facilitate bringing those groups together so that we collaborate? Because no one else is going to do it if we don't. And I think that's a great purpose for most marketing departments.
Love the metaphor of the kitchen. I've always thought that marketing should kind of be the life and soul of the party in terms of energy and enthusiasm, dynamism, but also that connecting role. Presumably, Amazon going to move to some form of hybrid model. Maybe brings another layer of challenge to bring that connectivity and belonging, both within the marketing team and beyond. What are your thoughts about how to ensure that doesn't fall off the radar in a hybrid world?
Tell me what you mean by a hybrid model.
Well, that people are going to be in the office far less. So I presume a lot of your role is quite virtual anyway, but just less moments of connection, physical in-person connection.
Okay, in terms of ways we work, right.
Yeah.
Well, at the moment we're operating in 11 countries in Europe. I've got a hub in London, Munich, Paris, and Madrid, and a head office in Seattle, and some of our creative team are in LA. So we're working virtually practically even before the pandemic. So ways of working and tools are very, very familiar to us. And so what we've noticed during the pandemic is productivity has gone up. We're worried that innovation is coming down. So globally, our strategy moving forward is 3-2. We'll be 3 days a week in the office and 2 days remote. And 4 weeks a year, you can work fully remotely, domestically, kind of wherever you want. I think that's a pretty nice way to do it. And our staff can be more or less based anywhere, provided it's in one of our hubs. But I think we'll have to be a little, I haven't worked this out yet, but I think we'll have to be a little bit conscious about how we go about organizing those 3 days, because I'd be sort of bummed if no one's there Monday and Friday and everyone's there Tuesday to Thursday. I also don't quite know how facilities will cope with that, because we'll need so much more office space, etc. So I will be encouraging the teams that work together to spend some time together each week. It helps build trust, and trust increases speed in business. But we're pretty comfy and familiar working remotely anyway. So I think we'll jiggle around with it and see how we go with it. We're meant to start back on September the 7th, but Delta might have other plans. At the Marketing Academy, we all got together. We were all double vaccinated, and 9 out of 30 got corona. So you sort of think, wow, 9 out of 30 and we're all double vaccinated. That doesn't bode well to going back to the office.
It certainly doesn't. Ed, I also want to just get some insights. Now, clearly, you're sitting at the forefront of the e-commerce, I wouldn't say revolution, but certainly the mega trend, the tectonic shift that we are seeing, and COVID has clearly exacerbated that. I just want to get your thoughts on where you see the future of things like e-commerce going. Just the maybe more macro level trends that you see are going to be important for us.
I don't have any big special insights, to be honest. I think marketing in my mind is meeting a customer need better than your competitors and being able to make a profit. Customers' needs are always changing. Customers are fabulously dissatisfied. Whatever it is that you do today that meets your customers' needs, I promise you next year they'll expect more. So, I think rather than trying to predict or imagine a future state that businesses can swim toward, I would encourage businesses to set themselves up in a way that they're very aware of what customers want and how their needs are changing, and they're engineered in a way that innovation and change is in the DNA of the business. So for example, the inventing process at Amazon is well documented. We call it working backwards. So what we do is when we see a need, we write a press release. It's usually just a page, and the press release is the day of that product or user feature or experience being launched. And we talk about it from the voice of the customer, the voice of the company. We articulate the idea, and then we have frequently asked questions, which kind of goes into how much did it cost, how is it built, all the sort of different problems and stuff. This PR FAQ, anybody can write. Anybody can present. We do it frequently at all levels, all through the company, and then they're funded. So, for example, we work with the Marketing Academy Foundation and have apprentices in the UK. I wanted to extend that program into Europe. So I work with Daryl, who's the CEO of the Marketing Academy Foundation. She helps me. We write a press release about launching it in Europe. We have all the questions in there. That becomes the business case, and then we either do or don't do it. So I'm working with her on that, and we either will or won't do it. But it's a super comfy, familiar process for me and everybody else. So I would say rather than try and imagine a steady state you need to move from to, try and set your business up in a way that it inventing and changing and evolving is actually the way you operate. And that's kind of one of the amazing facets of Amazon is it's a company that invents companies, or it's a company that is always evolving or changing.
Ed, can I just jump in there for 1 second and then talk and then just ask around how you then see the role of visioning in the context of inventing and evolving? Is there a high level North Star that you still aspire for in that sort of world and guise, or is it much more iterative in nature?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the North Star for us is to be the world's most customer-centric company. So that, by definition, has you very, very plugged into customer needs. I think the edit on that has probably been, we're so good at selection, price, and convenience that some customers now have an anxiety that there must be a hidden cost to the way you treat your sellers, or the way you treat your staff, or the way you treat the environment. So one of the new leadership principles Amazon has just crafted, I think came out 2 weeks ago, is with size comes great responsibility. So I think while we will not deviate from our North Star of customer centricity, we are now very aware of the responsibility to the environment, our employees, and our sellers, that we must not only behave well, we must be seen to behave well. And we're inventing a lot on that space as well. So that would probably be a build on that North Star as we grow.
Really interesting to hear how the linkage between working backwards as a process ladders up into something much more higher order. I just want to go back. You mentioned the somewhat ill-fated retreat that we were on, with 9 out of 30 getting COVID.
Don't call it ill-fated. Sherilyn might watch. It was wonderful. It really was.
You're absolutely right.
But it just shows how contagious Delta is.
Yeah. Ill-fated from an infectious diseases point of view, anyway. But we were sat next to each other for the semi-final, and I noticed two things. One was you noticed that there was some Chinese advertising on the hoardings, and you said out loud, "Well, that's because there's probably more Chinese people watching it than European people, given Asian pursuit of football." And then also an Amazon ad came on, and I think maybe you maybe it wasn't the right ad, or it was a comment we were on email to send to somebody, and it told me two things. One is you love your craft, you're tuned in, but it made me ask, and I know I'd be doing exactly the same thing. How do you switch off? Where's the boundaries? A bit about balance. How do you balance out the fact that you're passionate and positive and want to push, versus being kind to yourself?
So we don't think of things in terms of work-life balance, because it basically, for me, is a flawed concept that says work will always cost you or be painful. But we call it work-life harmony. And it's not just clever language, because work also is a great source of pride, joy, and energy for me. And so it's about creating that harmony. So, when I saw that ad on the football, I was excited and proud, but I was also thinking, I wonder if I had my time again, is that the right spot for this moment? But then, of course, I didn't know that England would be in the semi-final, and it's hard to create a Super Bowl spot for something you don't know if would happen. But that didn't cost me at that moment. That was a moment of reflection, and I enjoyed that moment. But there are some boundaries that I do have, particularly that we work with Seattle, and their day starts at 4 p.m. And so very easily I can be working till 10, 11 o'clock at night if I'm not careful. So a couple of things I've had to do. I've moved the email icon off my home screen of my phone to the second page, because it distresses me when I'm playing on my Instagram or something to see that there's 8 new emails, and I'll instantly go in and have a look. But I'll do that as a habit rather than an intention. And then when I'm meant to be relaxing before I go to bed, I'm suddenly reading a conflict email between two people, or an attack on me, or something that I don't want to be reading before I go to bed. So I've moved my email, and I have in my diary boundaries. So my day is from 9 until 6, and then I have a boundary. And then I ask that if I'm going to work later, which is fine, I have to some days, that I start a little bit later. Now, it usually doesn't work out that day. If I work to 8 p.m., I usually do still start at 9, but I have that there. So sometimes I can. And then that day I might, go out to breakfast with my husband because I'm going to be working till 8 p.m. or I'll go to the gym a little bit later or something like that. So there's just a consciousness there. And when I give more, which I do quite often, I choose to, and then sometimes I'll take from the other end of the day. I'm quite a high energy person. I'm a morning person. But when my tank is empty, it's fully empty, and I'm done. And so I have to respect that, or I will be grumpy and I won't bring my best self home at night. I've had moments of trouble in my relationship at home, because I give everything to work, and then I come home and I'm just a sack of biology with no joy to bring back to my family. That's not great either. So I just try and hold a consciousness about that. And any big company will suck infinity of what you can give it. So you have to choose what is fair and reasonable. And while you have to have a little bit of wriggle around that, at least have some sort of mental model about what's fair and reasonable.
Lovely.
Ed, I think we're running out of time. So let this be our last question, because we want to do some wrap ups, and there's so many golden nuggets for us to talk of. Just a bit of an open blue sky question, really. What does inspire you? What really, or who should I say, is your?
So I am so excited at the moment about the energy transition. It's given me goosebumps even thinking about it. It's honestly, the Google app on my phone I just love, because probably if you're into hate and nationalism. It serves you all inappropriate content, but I'm into the energy transition and it serves me the most exciting stuff. So nuclear fusion, small scale nuclear, wind, solar, battery, tidal energy, the whole energy transition is so exciting to me. And, you know, to be right in the center of that at Amazon, we just launched the Climate Pledge campaign this week. It's our mission to get to carbon neutrality 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Accord. We also aim to get to 100% renewable energy by 2030. We've pulled that forward to 2025. We've grown our renewable energy from 42% last year to 65% this year. I'm so excited at the ability of humans to invent and change. And I put 3.6 kilowatts of solar on the roof of our house in Malta this summer. We bought a hybrid electric plug-in. It now it can charge from half a day of the solar. I just am so excited by how we're changing. And I think this is going to be one of the most exciting decades in human history as the art of the possible. You know, you look at that activist shareholder that has completely flipped the Exxon strategy, and you look at all of these legacy companies scrambling to reinvent their strategies in a carbon sustainable way. That's a great source of energy and inspiration for me. So yeah, that's kind of geeky, but that's where I'm really excited at the moment.
That's not geeky. That's not geeky. That's the future of next generations to come. And hearing that Amazon's so focused on that as a subject is actually exciting for me to hear. Even our company, we're in the same road, but the impact you can have is huge. So all power to you, Ed. Well, the time's gone. I don't know where it went. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. We always do a little bit of a wrap at the end just to sort of pull out some of the key highlights. It's a bit of a challenge because there's quite a lot, but I'll do my best. I mean, I love the don't be a victim, be a player. You know, the blame, complain, defend paradigm. What's your next move? Such a great advice for almost every moment we face. You talked about putting people back better, giving people back better. It reminds me in New Zealand, they talk about you play rugby for the All Blacks for a while and your role is to leave the shirt in a better place. Love that. You know. Also on sport, we talked about you wouldn't get castigated or feel bad for telling somebody to move their elbow a little or play a shot a little bit differently. It should be the same for giving feedback if it comes from a place of good care. Marketing should be the kitchen of the family. Wonderful. Yeah. Customers are fabulously dissatisfied. Yeah, that really helps me to understand your work is never done. And then my final one actually is the work-life harmony. You said something about all companies will suck infinity out of you. And so helps if you love your work and you're passionate, but also you do set some boundaries and try to keep them as much as possible. So Ed, it's been wonderful to have you on. So many great insights. And I'll hand over to Richie, but thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, you've really summed it up really well. The one thing that I'm really being left with, Ed, is just how pleased I am for you. Because when we last saw you in 2016, I think you were on the journey of discovery, as many things were coming at you in your life. And I just feel this great sense that you've landed in such a great spot. But, you talked about this, the new Amazon sort of vision around, with size comes great responsibility. And I could see your eyes light up in so many of the ways that you are working today and being able to then, fuel that next era. And it just feels that your values, your purpose are so aligned with where the company is going. And it just really comes through in spades. And that's just a real source of inspiration for me to hear you speak about these various things. But over and beyond that, the fact that you've landed in such a happy spot for yourself, it just really gives me happiness, quite honestly. So it's really great.
I don't want everyone to think you don't have a tough day. Sometimes we do, but thank you. Overall, it's good.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, absolute pleasure. Just guys, before we finish off this session, just to let you know, next week we've got another fabulous guest on, Fran James. She's the founder of the Great British Entrepreneur Awards and Community. For any SMEs out there, you have no doubt heard of Fran and what she is doing. Sponsored by Starling Bank, but she is a great source of energy for SMEs all around the UK, and she's built this unbelievable network for SMEs to shine and be recognized all across the UK. So please do join us next week as we get to hear the ins and outs from Fran's world. Thank you, everybody. Over and out.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and thanks again, Ed.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. There we go. Show has ended. Thank you, Ed.